Everything in this house seems to have died except the clock. It ticks on the wall, measuring the seconds of my solitude with ruthless precision. At precisely 11 o'clock, I have tea. At 12:30, lunch. At 15, more tea and cookies. And then evening comes, and all I have to do is listen to that monotonous sound that reminds me that I am still alive. My name is Humphrey Atwood. I am 78 years old. My wife Eleanor died 3 years ago, and since then, my life has been a mechanical existence of inertia. Our apartment in the East End of Manchester is too big for one person. 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, a space that once seemed like a cozy nest for two has now become a crypt of memories. I wake up every morning at 6 o'clock, as I did for 50 years when I worked as a design engineer for an industrial equipment company, a habit I can't get rid of even after 20 years of retirement. I shave in front of the old mirror where the reflection shows me a wrinkled face with thinning gray hair and faded blue eyes. Eleanor used to say she loved my eyes because they were always smiling. Now they just stare back tiredly. Everything in our house is the same as it was when she was there. I haven't rearranged a single thing, as if she just went out to the store and is about to return. Her creams are on the dressing table. Her robe hangs on a hook in the bathroom. Her book lies on her bedside table, laid down on page 317. She won't read any further. We have one daughter, Sybil. She's 45 and married to Peregrine Walsh, an insurance company clerk with ambitions far beyond his abilities. I never got on much with my son-in-law, but I tried for Sybil's sake. Eleanor and I had once dreamed of a large family, but fate had decided otherwise. After Sybil's difficult labor, the doctor said we couldn't have any more children. So we poured all our love into our only daughter. Perhaps it was a mistake. I've only begun to realize that now that I'm alone. The day I noticed the first signs of their true attitude towards me, it was raining. A regular Manchester rain, fine but persistent, as if determined to soak the city to the skin. I was sitting in a chair by the window, leafing through an old photo album when the phone rang. "Hi, Dad." Sybil's voice sounded unusually cheerful. It was a tone I'd learned to recognize. It meant she wanted something from me. "Hello, darling. How are you?" "I'm fine. Listen, I've been thinking. You're all alone in this big apartment. You must be bored, huh?" "I'm getting by," I said, though the truth was that sometimes the silence made me want to scream. "Maybe you should think about a nursing home. I hear there are some very decent places nowadays. You'd be there among people your own age. You'd be cared for." I felt something cold spill inside me. That was 3 months ago, shortly after the anniversary of Eleanor's death. "Why such thoughts all of a sudden?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Well, Perry and I are thinking about the future. Your apartment is in a good neighborhood, and if you sell it—" She didn't finish the sentence, but it was clear to me. The apartment. Of course. The neighborhood has really become prestigious in recent years. Prices have increased several times, and I'm interfering with their plans with my inappropriate presence in my own home. "I'm not going anywhere, Sybil," I said firmly. "This is my home. It's my home, my mother's, and mine." "Well, you shouldn't," she said, a harsh tone in her voice. "You're becoming like Grandfather Oswald, a stubborn, uncooperative old man. That was a low blow. My father was indeed a difficult man, but to compare him to my daughter sounded like an insult." After that conversation, Sybil didn't call for almost a month. I couldn't bear to be the first to call, worrying whether they were all right. She answered in one word, making it clear that she was still hurt by my rejection. Then, as if by the way, she mentioned that she and Peregrine needed to replace the roof on their house, but they didn't have enough money. "Maybe you could help. After all, it's your grandchildren living under that leaky roof." Sybil and Peregrine have 2 children, Rupert, 14, and Tabitha, 12. I see them rarely, only on holidays when the family sees fit to visit me. The children are polite but distant, as if I were not their own grandfather, but just an old man they were brought to visit. I helped with the money for the roof. Then there was a trip to school camp for Rupert. Then a new laptop for Tabitha. For school, Dad, she needs to do well in school. I didn't say no, partly out of guilt. Maybe I really wasn't the best father, too immersed in work, partly out of a desire to be involved in their lives in some way. But gradually it began to dawn on me that the only thing my daughter and her husband were interested in was my money. Throughout my working life, I had set aside a significant portion of my earnings. Eleanor and I lived modestly but wisely. We invested in stocks, kept deposits. By the time we retired, we had a pretty decent amount of money, which allowed us not to worry about the future. When Eleanor died, I inherited it all, and apparently became the object of close attention of my relatives. I finally realized it last Sunday. Sybil and her husband had come to see me just for fun, which was unusual. Usually, their visits had a specific purpose. They brought a pie bought at the supermarket and a bottle of cheap wine. They sat, smiling, asking about my health with feigned concern. Then Peregrine cleared his throat and said, "Daddy," he always called me that, though I asked him to use my first name, "we have an important conversation to have with you." Sybil picked up on it. "You see, Dad, Perry's anniversary is next month. 50 years is a big date. So we thought we'd have a big party," continued the son-in-law. "My family, co-workers, friends, 30 people in all." I nodded, not understanding what they were getting at. "But you know, everything is so expensive now," Sybil made a sad face. "We did the math, and in a decent restaurant it would cost—" She said a sum that made me inwardly whistle. Although I could afford it, it was a lot more than I'd spent on myself in 6 months. "And we thought," Peregrine looked me straight in the eye, "that you could give Perry a gift like this. It's not every day your son-in-law turns 50. I looked at them, and I saw not a loving daughter and her husband, but 2 calculating men who were assessing how much more they could squeeze out of an old man before he was useless. "I'll think about it," was all I said then. They left a little disappointed, but confident that I would agree. And really, what else would a lonely old man do with his money? Not save up for a funeral. The next day, Sybil phoned and began to work me over. "Dad, have you thought about it? We have to book a restaurant right away or all the good seats will be taken." "I agree," I said, surprised at my decision. "Really?" Her voice was full of triumph. "You won't regret it. It will be a wonderful evening. Will you organize everything yourself, or shall I give you the restaurant's contacts?" "I'll do it myself," I answered. "Give me the details of the guests and your wishes." "Of course, Daddy. I'll send everything today." She hung up without even thanking me properly. I sat there clutching the phone and thinking about how strange life is. My only daughter, whom Eleanor and I loved so much, had grown into a man for whom I was only a source of funding for her needs. I began preparations for the gala the next day. Sybil had sent a guest list where most of it was Peregrine's relatives, his parents, 2 sisters with their husbands and children, cousins. There were only 5 co-workers. Apparently Peregrine wasn't particularly popular at work. The list of friends was also modest. 3 married couples they met from time to time. I booked one of Manchester's finest restaurants, the Clarendon, known for its fine cuisine and impeccable service. I prepaid 50% of the total amount, which was substantial money. Coordinated the menu, selected the wines, arranged for the cake. All week I've been organizing to make sure the party went perfectly. Last night I called Sybil to let her know everything was ready. "That's great, Dad." She sounded genuinely delighted. "You're a marvel." "I'm glad I could help," I replied. "I hope Peregrine likes it. He'll love it. It's going to be wonderful." There was so much enthusiasm in her voice that for a moment I felt needed. Maybe I'm wrong about them. Maybe they really do appreciate me. They just don't know how to show it. With that thought, I went to bed feeling almost happy for the first time in a long time. Tomorrow I'd see the whole family, meet Peregrine's relatives. the ones I'd never bothered to get close to in 20 years. Maybe this is the beginning of a new phase in our relationship. I woke up this morning full of hope. The gala is scheduled for 18 o'clock, but I wanted to get there early to make sure everything was in order. I picked out my best suit, the dark blue one Eleanor had given me for my 70th birthday. It still fit decently, though I'd lost a little weight in recent years. I was just tying my tie when a message arrived from Sybil. She'd been preferring to write rather than call lately. Saving time, I guess. Opening the message, I froze, not believing my eyes. "Dad, I'm sorry, but Perry prefers to have just his family at dinner. Thanks for organizing, you really helped us out." I reread the text several times trying to find some other meaning, but there wasn't one. My daughter and son-in-law had used me to organize and pay for a party I had no place at, and this, after all, I had done for them. Finding the right restaurant to celebrate Peregrine's anniversary was harder than I expected. I hadn't been out in years, and my ideas of what establishments were now considered prestigious were outdated. At my age, my social life was gradually shrinking to the size of my apartment and occasional walks to the nearest park. After Eleanor's death, I stopped following the changes in the city. Manchester changed. New buildings appeared. Old stores closed. Trendy restaurants opened. But I remained in my own little world, where time seemed to stand still. Sometimes I even found myself talking to Eleanor as if she were still here in the next room. I had to turn to the internet. Eleanor had once insisted I learn how to use a computer. "Don't be a dinosaur, Humphrey. At our age, you need to keep your brain sharp," she used to say. Now I was grateful to her for that persistence. The old laptop was slow, but it allowed me to stay in touch with the world. I spent the day researching reviews and restaurant websites. Some looked too modern and pretentious. I couldn't imagine Peregrine and his family in a place that served molecular cuisine or Scandinavian tapas. Others didn't seem solid enough for such an important event. In the end, I settled on the Clarendon, a restaurant with an impeccable reputation and a classic approach to food and service. Dialing the number, I prepared to explain my request. "Clarendon Restaurant, how may I help you?" The voice of the girl on the other end of the line sounded professionally polite. "Good afternoon. My name is Humphrey Atwood. I would like to book a banquet for 27 people on June 23rd. Is that possible?" There was a short pause. "I'm afraid all our banquet rooms are booked for the 23rd. We are on a very tight schedule this month. Perhaps another date?" I felt a pang of disappointment. Sybil had insisted on that date. Peregrine's birthday fell on a weekend, and it was convenient for them to have all the guests together. It had to be the 23rd. "Perhaps you could check again? It's a very important event for our family." One moment, the girl, judging by the sounds, was leafing through some pages or electronic calendar. "Unfortunately, I confirmed that on this date we are full, but I can offer you the 22nd or 24th. "No, that's not suitable." I began to feel awkward, as if I were imposing. "Perhaps you could recommend another restaurant of a similar caliber." "Of course, sir. You could try the Midland Grand or the River House. They also offer high-end banquet service." I thanked her and hung up. Calls to other restaurants yielded similar results. All were booked for the requested date. I began to panic. What if I couldn't organize this celebration? Sybil would be disappointed, and Peregrine would have another reason to think of me as a useless old man. After the 5th rejection, I decided to return to the Clarendon. Something told me it was the perfect place for the gala. I called again, but now asked to be connected to the manager. "Jeffrey Parker, manager of the Clarendon restaurant, speaking." His voice was deep and confident. "Mr. Parker, my name is Humphrey Atwood. I'm trying to book your banquet for June 23rd, but I'm told it's all booked up. It's for my son-in-law's 50th birthday, and I'd very much like to have it at your restaurant." "I understand, Mr. Atwood. Unfortunately, we're really booked to capacity on that date. I've decided to play the odds. Mr. Parker, I'm willing to pay extra to have the gala at your place. It would mean a great deal to my family." There was a pause. I could almost hear the manager weighing the pros and cons. "What time are you planning the event, Mr. Atwood?" 18 o'clock. He seemed to be considering something. "We have a reservation in the main hall that ends at 16:30. Theoretically, we could have the hall ready by 18, but that would require extra effort from our staff." "I'm willing to compensate for that effort," I said quickly, sensing that there was a chance. "In that case," his tone became more businesslike, "let's discuss the details. How many people are you expecting?" 27, including children." "I see. For such a number of guests, we recommend a banquet menu of premium or deluxe category." "Have you made a decision yet?" We spent almost an hour discussing the menu, drinks, decorations, and other details. The price went up with each item, but I didn't mind. I wanted this day to be special for everyone. By the end of the conversation, the amount had grown to astronomical, but I agreed. "We will require a 50% deposit to confirm the reservation," Mr. Parker said. "The balance would be due at least 3 days before the event." "No problem. I can be there first thing tomorrow morning." "Great, Mr. Atwood. I'll be expecting you in person." The next day, I put on my old tweed jacket, which Eleanor had always considered solid, and went to the bank. Withdrawing such a sum in cash was a little unsettling. I wasn't used to carrying large sums of money. Putting the envelope in my inside pocket and buttoning my jacket, I took the bus to the city center. The Clarendon looked even more impressive than it did in the pictures on the internet. The Victorian building had been skillfully restored, retaining the spirit of old Manchester while exuding modern elegance. Inside, I was greeted by marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and well-mannered staff. Mr. Parker appeared to be a middle-aged man with impeccable posture and an attentive gaze. He escorted me to his office where we completed the formalities. I handed him the envelope with the money. He gave me a receipt and the contract, which I read carefully before signing. "We will do our best to make your son-in-law's holiday unforgettable, Mr. Atwood," he assured me. "Don't worry about a thing." As I left the restaurant, I felt strangely relieved. It was as if I had completed an important mission. Now I had to give Sybil the good news. I called her as soon as I got home. "Sybil, everything's arranged. The banquet will be at the Clarendon, just as you wanted." "The Clarendon?" There was a tone of surprise in her voice. "But it's one of the most expensive restaurants in town. How did you get it?" "I have my own connections," I said, a little slyly. "Let her think that her old father was still capable of something." This is amazing, Dad. Perry's gonna love it." "What about the menu?" I told her in detail about the entrees, wines, dessert, and a special cake that would be customized. "Sounds fancy." She was clearly impressed. "And how much is all this?" "Don't worry about money," I interrupted her. "It's my gift." "You're the best, Dad," exclaimed Sybil with an enthusiasm I hadn't heard from her in years. "There are some more details we need to discuss. Why don't I come over tomorrow after work?" "Of course, I'll be waiting." The next day, Sybil showed up at my house around 17 o'clock. She looked as lively and excited as when she was a child just before Christmas. We sat down in the kitchen and she took a notebook out of her bag with some notes in it. "So, Dad, I've made a list of things we need to discuss. First, seating arrangements." I sketched out a rough diagram. She showed me a piece of paper with circles for the tables and the names of the guests. Perry's parents should sit in the seats of honor, of course. His sisters and their husbands are at the next table. Perry's co-workers are right there. I looked carefully at the chart, trying to find my name. There wasn't one. "Where would I sit?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Sybil froze for a moment. "Oh, I forgot to add you. Of course, you'll be sitting at the head table with us." She finished my name quickly, but I noticed that she did it without much enthusiasm. "Okay." I nodded. "What else do we need to discuss?" We spent an hour going over the details, from the music to the length of the event. Sybil was specific and demanding. She wanted everything to be perfect, and I understood. After all, it was an important day for her husband. But somewhere in the back of my mind an unpleasant feeling was brewing. Something about her behavior seemed fake. It was as if she were playing the part of a caring daughter, but she was more interested in the party than in my participation in it. When we'd finished, Sybil gathered up her notes and stood up. "I've got to go, Dad. Perry's expecting me for dinner." She looked at her watch. "Oh, I'm late. I still have to call Laura about the dress." Laura had been her best friend since high school. They'd kept their relationship close, even though Laura now lived in the suburbs and was busy raising 3 children. "Of course. I won't keep you," I said as I walked her to the door. Sybil was on her way out when her cell phone rang. "Oh, it's Laura." She gave me an apologetic look. "Sorry, Dad, I've got to take this. It's about the dress." She walked out onto the landing, closing the door behind her, but not all the way. I wasn't going to eavesdrop, but I could hear her voice, and old curiosity isn't a good trait, but it's hard to get rid of. "Laura, hello. Yes, I've just come from my father," said Sybil. "Can you believe he's organized the banquet at the Clarendon after all?" "Yes, the Clarendon. I don't know where he got the money from, but he paid for the whole thing." Pause. "No, I don't feel guilty. He's still sitting on that money and not doing anything with it. At least this way they'll go to something useful." Another pause. "No, of course he'll come to the party. Where will he go?" Her laugh sounded cold and calculating. Although, to be honest, Perry isn't thrilled. He says the old man's going to spoil the mood with his endless stories of the good old days. You know how boring he is. I froze, not believing my ears. Boring old man. Is that what my daughter says about me behind my back? "Oh, come on, Laura," Sybil went on. "You do realize I only have to deal with him for the money. If it wasn't for that, I'd have put him in a nursing home and forgotten about this headache." I felt the blood rush from my face. I felt cold inside. My daughter, my child, the one I loved with all my heart, thinks I'm a burden and is only interested in my money. "Well, we'll talk later," said Sybil. "I've got to go. I'll call you tonight." I moved quickly away from the door and pretended to be adjusting the books on the shelf when she came back into the apartment. "Sorry, Dad. That was Laura. We were discussing outfits for the holiday." She smiled that fake smile that I could now see right through. "That's okay," I replied, trying to keep my voice normal. "Tell her I said hi." "I will. Well, I'm off. I'll call you this week, okay?" She pecked me on the cheek and walked away, leaving me alone with a resounding emptiness inside. I sat still for a long time, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe she was just blowing off steam in a conversation with a friend. We all sometimes say things we don't really mean. But no, Sybil's voice sounded all too sincere. There wasn't a shadow of a joke or exaggeration in it. She really did think I was a burden, a bore, a source of money, and nothing more. When did that happen? When did my little girl, the one I taught to ride her bike, the one I read bedtime stories to, turn into this kind of person? I tried to remember if there were signs I'd missed. Maybe she had always been like this and I just didn't want to see it. Eleanor sometimes said we spoiled Sybil too much. "She'll grow up selfish, Humphrey," my wife warned. But I always defended my daughter. "She just knows what she wants. That's a good quality in today's world." I realize now that Eleanor was right. We had raised a man who thinks only of himself, who only sees his own father as a source of financial support. My first reaction was to call the restaurant and cancel, take the money and use it for something else. Maybe for the trip that Eleanor and I had always dreamed of, but never realized because of our constant busyness. But then I thought, would that solve the problem? Sybil would just find another way to use me, and I'll give in again, because she's my daughter and I love her no matter what. It was the bitter truth. I loved her even though I knew she didn't return the favor. Parental love is a strange thing. It doesn't go away even when you're betrayed. I spent a sleepless night struggling with conflicting feelings. Anger and resentment struggled with love and the desire to forgive. By morning, I hadn't come to any decision. I simply got up, made myself some tea, and sat by the window, watching the city wake up. "What would you do, Eleanor?" I asked into the void. Of course, there was no answer, but I knew my wife. She was a kind person, but she wouldn't let herself sit on her neck. "You can't let others take advantage of you, Humphrey," she would say, "even if it's our daughter." I knew I had to decide something, to let Sybil continue to manipulate me or to find the strength to stand up to it. Justice demanded the latter, but love pulled towards the former. It was the hardest internal struggle of my life. The morning was overcast, typical of Manchester. The gray sky and the light rain pounding on the windows matched my mood perfectly. It had been 3 days since my conversation with Sybil, and I still couldn't come to a final decision. Part of me wanted to just forget the overheard conversation and pretend everything was fine. The other part demanded justice. I had to pay the rest of the banquet fee that day, which was the terms of my contract with the restaurant. I had the money ready and was about to leave the house when my phone beeped with an incoming message. It was Sybil. "Dad, I'm sorry, but Perry prefers to have just his family at the dinner. Thanks for organizing, you really helped us out." I reread the message several times, not believing my eyes. Every word was like a stab to the heart. Only his family. Who am I? Am I not family? I'm Sybil's father, the grandfather of her children. Who do you have to be to do that to a family man? My hands began to tremble. I sank into the chair, trying to cope with the emotions that came up. Anger, resentment, disappointment, everything mixed into a toxic cocktail, eating away at my soul from the inside. My first impulse was to call Sybil and tell her what I thought of her behavior, but I knew that would get me nowhere. She'd make some excuse, maybe even apologize, but nothing would change. She had already shown her true attitude toward me. Instead, I dialed the Clarendon number. My voice was surprisingly calm, even though I was seething inside. "Clarendon Restaurant, how may I help you?" I heard a familiar female voice. "Good afternoon. I need to speak to Mr. Parker. This is Humphrey Atwood." "Just a moment, Mr. Atwood. I'll put you through." A soft melody played in the receiver. I looked out the window at the rain and thought about what I was about to do. It was a decisive step, and there would be no turning back. But did I have a choice? Let them continue to use me? No, this had to end. "Mr. Atwood, it's good to hear from you." Mr. Parker sounded cheerful. "Are you calling about the final payment? We were just about to send you a reminder." "Yes, Mr. Parker, but the situation has changed a bit," I answered. "I'd like to meet you in person. Is that possible today?" "Sure. I'll be at the restaurant until 18 o'clock. Would that be all right with you?" "That's fine. I'll be at your place in about an hour." I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. The decision had been made. Now I had to act. I pulled myself together and walked out of the house. The rain had stopped a little, but the air was damp and cool. I pulled up the collar of my coat and headed toward the bus stop. On the way downtown, I tried to calm down, but I couldn't stop thinking about how easily Sybil had dismissed me from the family celebration. Just his family. That phrase kept spinning around in my head like a broken record. There had been many occasions over the years when they'd shown their true attitude towards me, but I'd turned a blind eye. I remembered Christmas 2 years ago, the first Christmas after Eleanor's death. I had invited Sybil and her family to my house, hoping that celebrating together would help me get through my wife's absence. They agreed, but at the last minute Sybil called to say they'd decided to spend Christmas at Peregrine's parents' house. "Sorry, Dad, but the kids are so anxious to be with the other grandchildren, you understand. We'll stop by the next day, okay?" They didn't come the next day or the week after. Sybil called on December 31st and curtly wished me a Happy New Year. I spent the holidays all alone, looking at the decorated Christmas tree I had set up especially for my grandchildren. And there was the time in the hospital when I had heart surgery. Scheduled, but serious nonetheless. Sybil visited me once for 5 minutes, saying she was very busy at work. I lay in the ward and watched the other patients receive relatives who brought home-cooked food, fresh clothes, sat with them for hours, held their hand. And there was no one to hold my hand. Eleanor wouldn't have left me like that. We'd been together almost 50 years, and she'd always been there for me in times of need. And I was there for her until the very end, when the cancer was eating away at her body, and she still found the strength to smile and tell me everything would be all right. The bus stopped near the downtown mall and I got off, immersed in my thoughts. It was still a 10-minute walk to Clarendon's, so I decided to walk despite the drizzle. I needed to gather my thoughts before my conversation with Mr. Parker. When I entered the restaurant, I was greeted by the same polite girl as last time. "Good afternoon, Mr. Atwood. Mr. Parker is expecting you. Let's go into his office." The manager got up from his desk as I entered and extended his hand to me. "Mr. Atwood, good to see you. Have a seat. Tea? Coffee?" "No, thank you," I replied, sinking into the chair opposite him. "I don't have much time." "I see. You mentioned that the situation has changed. Nothing serious, I hope?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Mr. Parker, I'm forced to make a change in our arrangement. I will no longer be paying for this banquet." His face changed, becoming wary. "You want to cancel the event? In that case, I must remind you that under the terms of the contract, the prepayment is non-refundable, and there may be additional penalties." "No," I interrupted him. "I don't want to cancel the event. I want someone else to pay for it." "I don't quite understand," he frowned. "It's simple." I pulled my phone out of my pocket and showed him a message from Sybil. "It's from my daughter. She says I'm not invited to the party I organized. Her husband only wants his family there." Mr. Parker read the message, a look of understanding on his face. "That's how—" he stretched out. "What do you suggest?" "I suggest changing the payer in the contract. Let my daughter, Sybil Walsh, or her husband, Peregrine Walsh, pay now. The deposit I made, I want it returned to me today." The manager leaned back in his chair, contemplating the situation. "This is an unusual request, Mr. Atwood. Legally speaking, the contract is with you and—" "Legally," I interrupted him again, "I haven't made the final payment yet, and I can simply cancel the whole event. Then you would only get my advance payment, not the full amount. But I suggest a more favorable option for you. To keep the reservation, just change the payer." He was silent, considering my words. I could see the gears turning in his head, calculating the pros and cons. "Okay," he finally said, "we can do it. But I need confirmation from Miss Walsh or Mr. Walsh that they'll make that commitment. Otherwise, we run the risk of not having a client and not being paid. I understand. But they don't need to know that I've refused to pay until they show up here on the day of the event." I allowed myself a small chuckle. "Let it be a surprise." Mr. Parker looked at me carefully. "Mr. Atwood, I understand your feelings, but our restaurant is a business. We can't take any risks." I thought about it. He was right, of course. Sybil might well refuse to pay, and then the restaurant would be at a loss. "What if I left you a deposit?" I suggested. "The same amount as the deposit. If my daughter refuses to pay, you can use the money. If she pays, you return the deposit to me." The manager thought about it. "It could work, but we'll still need to notify your daughter of the change of payer. Not now, but at least 1 day before the event." "An hour before," I objected. "Not before. And I want you to tell her that it was my decision and explain why." Mr. Parker sighed. "Mr. Atwood, we try to avoid getting involved in family conflicts. It can have a negative impact on the reputation of the restaurant." "I'm not asking you to get involved in the conflict. Just tell her the truth, that I refused to pay because I wasn't invited to a party I organized. No emotion, just the facts." He looked at me for a long time as if trying to figure out what kind of person was sitting in front of him. Finally, he nodded. "All right, we will do as you ask. But an hour before the event, we will contact Miss Walsh and inform her of the change of payer. That's our final stipulation." "Fair enough," I agreed. "Now, about getting my retainer refunded, that's going to take some time to process. Can you wait?" "Sure." While the paperwork was being processed, we discussed the details of the new arrangement. I left a deposit in the same amount as the original deposit, with an undertaking that it would be returned to me if Sybil or Peregrine paid for the banquet. The deposit was necessary so that the restaurant wouldn't be left at a loss if they refused to pay and the event fell through. An hour later, I walked out of the Clarendon with a check for the refunded deposit and a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, I hadn't allowed myself to be used. I had stood up for my own dignity. When I got home, the first thing I did was check my phone. No calls or messages from Sybil. She probably considered the matter settled. Dad had paid for everything. No need to worry. I made tea and sat in my favorite chair by the window, which overlooked the small park across the street. The rain had stopped, and there were gaps in the sky between the clouds. Rays of the evening sun shone through the damp foliage of the trees, creating a play of light and shadow. "What would you say, Eleanor?" I asked the void. Would she approve of my act, or would she consider it petty revenge? Eleanor had always been kinder than me, willing to forgive wrongs, but she also believed in justice and respect. "Love doesn't mean letting others wipe their feet on you, Humphrey," she would say. "Sometimes you have to show people that their actions have consequences." I wondered what would happen when Sybil found out about my decision. There would be a scandal, of course. She'd call me selfish, say I'd ruined her husband's holiday, maybe even break up with me. But have we ever had a relationship before? A real one, based on mutual love and respect, or just a semblance, supported by my money? I remembered another episode that happened about a year ago. My birthday, my 77th. I was hoping my family would come to my house, so I prepared a treat. I bought good wine, ordered a cake from the best pastry shop. Sybil promised they'd be here for dinner. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I set the table and waited. At 3 o'clock, I called her, but she didn't pick up. At 4 o'clock, I sent a message. The reply didn't come until 6 p.m. "Sorry, Dad. We had a change of plans. Tabitha's not feeling well. We'll come by the other day." They didn't come the next day or the week after. I threw the cake away. I drank the wine myself, looking at old photos and remembering the times when I had a real family. And then there was the Christmas incident I've already recalled, and many other small episodes when my feelings and needs were simply ignored as unimportant and irrelevant. No, Sybil had shown her true feelings for me long ago. I just didn't want to see it, clinging to the illusion of family ties. But after today's message, there was no more illusion. I felt no gloating at the thought of Sybil and Peregrine's impending embarrassment, only the sadness and strange calm of a man who had finally recognized the obvious and stopped fighting reality. The time until X Day stretched slowly. I lived my usual measured life, reading, watching television, sometimes going for walks in the park. Sybil didn't call or write. Apparently, I was no longer of interest to her until after my husband's anniversary. On the eve of the celebration, I felt a strange uneasiness, not doubts about the correctness of my decision, no. Rather, anticipation mixed with anxiety. Like before an important exam or job interview, I knew something would change tomorrow, perhaps forever. On the day of the party, I sat at home, occasionally glancing at the clock. The banquet was to begin at 18 o'clock, so at 17 Mr. Parker would call Sybil with the news. I imagined her reaction, first bewilderment, then shock, then anger. What would she do? Would she call me with accusations? Rush down here? Or would she try to solve the problem on the spot? At 16:30 my phone rang. It was Mr. Parker. "Mr. Atwood, good afternoon. I'm just calling to let you know everything's ready for the event. As we agreed, at 17 o'clock I'll contact Miss Walsh and inform her of the change of payer." "Thank you, Mr. Parker. I appreciate your punctuality. I should warn you that the reaction may be, emotional. I understand. If there's a problem and they refuse to pay, use my bail like we agreed. I will. I'll contact you later with any developments. We said our goodbyes and I was left waiting. Time dragged agonizingly slow. I tried to read, but I couldn't concentrate. My thoughts kept returning to the upcoming conflict. At 17 hours and 15 minutes, the phone rang again. This time it was Sybil. I took a deep breath and accepted the call. "Dad, what have you done?" Her voice sounded shrill, on the verge of hysteria. "I just got a call from the restaurant saying you refused to pay for the banquet. Are you crazy?" "Hello, Sybil," I said calmly. "I'm not crazy. I just decided I wouldn't pay for a party I wasn't invited to." "What? What are you talking about? Who said you weren't invited?" "You did," I quoted her message. "Dad, I'm sorry, but Perry prefers his family to be the only ones at the dinner." "But that's not what I meant," she exclaimed. We just... "What exactly did you mean, Sybil?" I asked, feeling a wave of bitterness rising inside. "That I'm not family? That I'm not good enough for the company of your husband and his relatives?" "Dad, this is not the time for this conversation. We're in the middle of a crisis. All the guests are on their way and the restaurant wants full payment before the event. Where are we going to get that kind of money?" "I don't know, Sybil. That's your problem. Maybe Peregrine could ask his family. After all, they're the ones who'll be enjoying the party." You're doing this out of spite." There were tears in her voice. "You're trying to spoil our party." "No, Sybil, I just don't want to be used. Not anymore." There was a long pause. "What do you want?" she finally asked in a calmer tone. "For us to apologize?" "Okay, I'm sorry. We were wrong. You're invited, of course. Come now." "It's not about the invitation, Sybil. It's about respect. It's about the way you treat me. I know what you say about me behind my back. I know you think I'm a boring old man and a headache. I know you're only interested in my money." "What? Where did you—" she stammered, apparently remembering her conversation with Laura. "You were eavesdropping?" "It doesn't matter. What's important is that I will no longer fund people who don't respect me. Solve your own problems." I hung up without waiting for an answer. My heart was pounding, my hands were shaking, but I felt surprisingly light. It was as if I'd shed a heavy weight I'd been carrying for years. The phone immediately rang again. Then it rang again and again. I didn't answer it. Then the messages started coming, first begging, then accusing, then threatening. I didn't answer them either. Finally, the calls stopped. I sat in the silence of my apartment and watched the dusk fade outside the window. What was happening at the Clarendon now? Were Sybil and Peregrine able to find the money? Or had they had to cancel the gala? Or maybe they are collecting money from the guests to pay the bill. I found that I no longer cared. I had done what I should have done long ago. Stopped being an ATM for people who didn't value me as a human being. Now, all that was left to do was wait for the consequences. After a sleepless night, I greeted the morning with a sense of strange calm. It was as if the storm that had been raging inside me for years had finally subsided. The telephone was silent. No calls, no messages from Sybil. I didn't know how last night had ended, and I tried not to think about it as I went about my morning routine. At about 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang, sharp, insistent. I knew who it was before I opened it. On the threshold stood Sybil and Peregrine. Their faces were a mixture of rage, fatigue, and something else, maybe fear or confusion. "Well, come in," I said, stepping aside. They came in without saying a word. Sybil was pale, with red eyes, probably from tears or sleeplessness. Peregrine looked as if he were ready to explode with anger. His usually neatly combed hair was disheveled and his tie was askew. "Tea? Coffee?" I offered with deliberate politeness. "Are you kidding me?" Peregrine hissed. "After what you did." "What did I do?" I asked calmly, looking him straight in the eye. You embarrassed us in front of the whole family, Sybil exclaimed. In front of our friends, our co-workers. It was the most humiliating evening of our lives. Tell me, I asked, pointing to the couch. I really want to know how it ended. They looked at each other for a moment, as if questioning whether they should talk to me at all. Finally, Sybil sank down on the edge of the couch. Peregrine remained standing with his arms crossed over his chest. Do you want to know what happened? Sybil began in a voice shaking with indignation. We arrived at the restaurant an hour beforehand to check everything was all right. And then this manager of yours calls us into his office and says that you canceled the payment and now we have to pay the full amount before the event. I tried to explain that there was a misunderstanding, Peregrine intervened, but this pompous turkey kept saying the same thing. Mr. Atwood has made it clear that he refuses to pay for a banquet to which he was not invited. We tried to call you, continued Sybil, but you didn't answer, and the guests were already starting to arrive. What did you do? I asked, remaining calm. What could we do? Peregrine exclaimed. We didn't have that kind of money in cash, and without payment the restaurant refused to start service. Perry's mom offered to use their credit card, sighed Sybil, but it didn't have enough credit limit. Perry's dad started calling the bank, but it was too late. It was closed. And then? I prompted, seeing that she had stopped talking. And then we had to, she stammered, apparently struggling to get the words out of her mouth. We had to ask the guests to contribute to the dinner. I stared at her in silence, trying to imagine the scene. The festive mood, the guests all dressed up, and suddenly she was asking for money. It was awful, Sybil whispered. Some of the people looked at us as if we were like beggars. Perry's sister, Felicity, asked if we were scam artists if we couldn't pay for the banquet we'd ordered. Everyone thought it was some kind of joke, Peregrine added grimly. And then, when they realized it was serious, they started asking questions. Why hadn't we told them in advance? Why did we invite them if we couldn't pay for it? My mother almost fainted with shame. And were you able to collect the necessary amount of money? I asked. Partly, said Sybil. Not all the guests were prepared to pay that kind of money for dinner. Some even left. In the end, we agreed with the restaurant on a simplified menu and reduced service. Instead of a fancy banquet, it turned out to be a farce. My co-workers laughed, Peregrine said bitterly. I heard Jenkins whispering to Morrison, Is this the same Walsh who bragged that his father-in-law would throw a memorable party? He can't even organize a family dinner without a scandal. Your mother. Sybil turned to her husband, and there was an accusatory note in her voice, said she'd always known there was something wrong with my family. Apple from the apple, she said, as if it was my fault. And your father, Peregrine parried, gave us this nightmare. So yes, the apple does fall from the tree. They were about to claw at each other when I interrupted them. So it wasn't a good evening, was it? They stared at me with the same look of disbelief on their faces. It didn't go well, exclaimed Sybil. It was a nightmare, a disaster, total humiliation, and all because of you. Because of me? I raised my eyebrows. And not because of the fact that you decided to use me as an ATM and then remove me from the holiday, which I myself organized and paid for. It's not like that at all, Sybil protested. You've got it all wrong. Dad, I'm sorry, but Perry prefers his family to be the only ones at the dinner. What is there to misunderstand? You're taking it out of context, she exclaimed. I meant, what exactly did you mean, Sybil? I interrupted her. That I'm not family. That I'm not good enough for the company of your husband and his relatives? She opened her mouth but said nothing, apparently unable to find a suitable excuse. Look, I said, turning to both of them, I'm old, but I'm not stupid. I know how you feel about me. I know I'm just a source of financial support for you. A bored old man, as you said to your friend Laura, who has to be fiddled with just for the money. Sybil turned even paler. You overheard me talking to you? It doesn't matter. What matters is what you said, and the way you've treated me all these years. We've always been good to you, she objected. We've invited you to holidays, called you. Really? I grinned bitterly. What about Christmas 2 years ago, when you promised to come and then canceled at the last minute? How about my birthday last year when you didn't show up either? How about the fact that your children hardly know their grandfather? When was the last time you asked how I was feeling, not out of politeness, but because you were genuinely curious? Sybil was silent, lowering her eyes. Peregrine was shifting from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. I've always been your ATM, I continued. Roof leaks, call Dad. Kids need gadgets, call Daddy. If you want a fancy party, let Daddy pay for it. But when it comes to ordinary human respect and attention, you always find excuses. It's not fair, Sybil muttered. We have our own lives, our own problems. We all have our own lives, Sybil, but a family is when people make time for each other in spite of their problems, when they support each other not just financially but emotionally, when they show respect. And that's why you've decided to embarrass us in front of everyone? Peregrine intervened. To take revenge in this way? I wasn't taking revenge, I replied calmly. I just stopped playing by your rules. You wanted to use me, but to exclude me from the festivities. I didn't let that happen. If you want to have celebrations only for your family, please, but pay for them yourself. You knew we couldn't find that kind of money at the last minute, exclaimed Sybil. You put us in a desperate situation on purpose. Just as you put me in a desperate situation with your message on the eve of the holiday, I parried. How do you think I felt when I realized I wasn't family to you? There was a heavy silence in the room. Sybil sat with her head down, and Peregrine looked away, clearly avoiding my gaze. Well, he said at last, what's done is done. Nothing can be changed. We've come to tell you that. He hesitated, apparently searching for words. That we can't go on like this, Sybil finished for him, looking up at me. After what happened, my mother-in-law refuses to hear from you. She said she wouldn't cross the threshold of our house if you were there, and Perry's sister. Felicity claimed we used them, Peregrine added grimly, that we knew we couldn't pay for the banquet and tricked them into paying for it. Now no one wants to talk to us. My parents, my sisters, even my friends have turned their backs. We've become outcasts in our own family. And all because of you, Sybil exclaimed, her voice full of accusation. You've ruined our lives. I looked at them and felt no gloating or satisfaction at their suffering, only sadness at the realization that my daughter had grown up to be such a person. No, Sybil, I said softly. I didn't ruin your life. I simply stopped being complicit in the deception. You created this situation yourself by your attitude, not only toward me, but toward the people you invited to the party. What do you mean? She frowned. You invited them knowing you couldn't pay for the banquet yourself. You counted on my money without even bothering to ask if I agreed to be excluded from the feast. You disrespected everyone, me, the guests, even each other. And now you wonder about the consequences. How dare you, Peregrine is furious, to teach us morality after what you've done? I'm not teaching you morality, I replied. I'm just explaining my point of view. You came here for excuses or apologies, but I'm not going to make excuses or apologize. I did what I thought was right. And now what? Sybil asked, and there was something akin to despair in her voice. What do? We're disgraced in front of everyone. Perry's parents won't talk to us. His sisters are spreading rumors. We can't even go to the supermarket without meeting someone who was at that ill-fated dinner and now looks at us with contempt. It'll pass, I said. People will forget. There will be new gossip, new scandals. In a month, no one will even remember the incident. Do you think so? Peregrine grinned bitterly. My mother will not forget this humiliation for the rest of her life. She has always been against our marriage, and now she has had all her prejudices confirmed. What do you suggest we do? Sybil asked. Move to another town, change jobs, Change friends. I suggest you learn a lesson from what happened, I replied. Stop living at other people's expense, financially and emotionally. Start building honest relationships with people based on mutual respect, not exploitation. Easy for you to say, exclaimed Sybil. You're sitting here in your apartment alone with no obligations, no responsibilities, and we've got to get on with our lives. And you will move on, I said, but hopefully in a different way than before. Sybil jumped up from the sofa, her face contorted with anger. I hate you, she shouted. You've always been cold, aloof, always putting your principles before people. Mom was the only one who made you human, and without her you turned into a monster. I shuddered at those words like a blow. She'd never spoken to me like that before. You don't care about anyone but yourself, she continued, no longer holding back her tears. You didn't even think that we could lose friends, respect, jobs. You were only thinking about your resentment, your ego. Sybil, Peregrine tried to intervene, but she waved him away. No, let him know. Let him know what he's done. She turned to me. You know what my boss, who was also at that dinner, said? That she couldn't trust a man who'd surprise his family like that, that it was a sign of unreliability. And after all, next month the promotion was to be decided. I remained silent, not knowing what to say. I didn't realize that the consequences would be so serious. We didn't come here to quarrel, Peregrine said at last, putting his hand on Sybil's shoulder. I don't know what we wanted. To understand, I suppose, why you did what you did. I've explained why, I replied quietly, and I'm sorry if it caused you more pain than I intended, but I don't regret the decision itself. Of course you don't, Sybil said bitterly. You never regret anything. You always think you're right. Well, enjoy being right all by yourself. We won't bother you anymore. She headed for the door. Peregrine followed her but turned around on the threshold. You know, Humphrey, he said with sudden seriousness, I never thought much of you. I thought you boring and petty. But I must confess that I never expected you to be so determination. I'm impressed, though I hate you for what you've done. With those words he walked out, closing the door behind him. I was left alone trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Sybil was right about one thing. I really hadn't thought about all the possible consequences of what I had done. I hadn't considered how it might affect their work, their relationships with their friends. I wanted to teach them a lesson, not ruin their lives. They were exaggerating, though. It's unlikely that one bad dinner could have had such catastrophic consequences. More likely, they were just dramatizing the situation to increase the guilt in me. Still, I felt strange. Not guilty, no, I still thought my act was justified. But sad. Sad at the realization that my relationship with my daughter, which was already strained, was now possibly severed forever. Eleanor would be saddened. She had always strived for peace in the family, always finding ways to smooth over conflicts. Family is the most important thing, Humphrey, she used to say. But could what Sybil and I had had in recent years be called family? Was that how a real family treated each other? I went to the window and looked out at the street for a long time, where people were going about their business. Young couples, families with children, elderly people. They were all connected to someone, had someone. And I had no one now. But in a strange way, I felt freer than I had ever felt in years, as if freed from the heavy chains of dependency and obligation to people who didn't appreciate me. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe fully. It was a week after Sybil and Peregrine's visit. The phone was silent, and my apartment was silent, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the occasional sound from the street. I was living my normal, measured life, but something had changed. There was no longer that heaviness inside me, that sense of the wrongness of the world that had haunted me since Eleanor's death. I thought a lot about what had happened, and I came to the conclusion that I did not regret my action. Yes, Perhaps I had been too harsh. Perhaps I should have spoken to Sybil beforehand, explained my feelings. But hadn't I tried to do that before? Hadn't she listened? On Wednesday, as I was returning from the store, I was approached by my neighbor, Alice Brighton, an elderly widow who lived a floor below. "Mr. Atwood, you've had a visitor," she said. A young woman, very upset, rang the doorbell several times and then sat on the stairs crying. "My daughter," I sighed. "Thank you, Alice. Are you all right?" There was genuine concern in her eyes. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "I'm fine," I smiled. "It's just a family disagreement." "I understand," she nodded. "I have a difficult relationship with my son, too. He lives in Australia and calls once every 6 months, and it's like he's doing me a favor." We talked for a few more minutes, and I suddenly realized that this was the longest conversation I'd had with my neighbor in all the years I'd lived in this house. Previously, we had only exchanged formal greetings. Strange how sometimes a common problem can bring people together. In the evening, Sybil called. I stared at the phone screen for a long time, deciding whether or not to answer. Finally, I accepted the call. "Hi, Dad." Her voice sounded tired. "I came to see you today, but you weren't home." "I know," the neighbor said. "We need to talk," she said after a pause. "The situation, complicated." "What happened?" "Perry's parents have completely severed their relationship with us. His mother said she didn't want anything to do with a family that treats old people like that. Can you believe that? She's accusing us of mistreating you." I couldn't resist a bitter chuckle. The irony of the situation was too obvious. "Wasn't it?" "Dad, don't start," she said, a touch of irritation in her voice. "I'm not calling to hear the accusations again. I want to find a way out of this situation." "And what do you see? We have to reconcile. In public so that everyone can see that we have a normal relationship. Maybe a family dinner at a restaurant or a weekend trip out of town. Something to take pictures of and show everyone that we are a friendly family." I remained silent, amazed at her approach. She wasn't talking about real reconciliation, about working on the relationship. She wanted to create an appearance for others. "Sybil," I finally said, "you're not offering a solution to the problem. You're offering a disguise. It won't work." "What are you suggesting?" Her voice sounded irritated. "Sit around and do nothing until our reputation is completely ruined?" "I suggest we start by having an honest conversation. Admit our mistakes, apologize for them, and really change the way we treat each other." "You want me to apologize?" she exclaimed. "After what you pulled?" "I want us both to recognize our part in this conflict," I replied calmly. "I already admit that my way of expressing disagreement was perhaps too harsh, but you have to admit that your treatment of me was disrespectful." "That is not true. We have always respected you." "Sybil," I sighed, "let us not deceive each other. I heard what you said about me to Laura. I've seen the way you've treated me all these years. You were only interested in my money, not in me as a person." There was a heavy pause. "All right," she said at last. "Perhaps we have not always been considerate of your feelings, but you have to understand, we have our own lives, our own problems. We can't devote all our time to you. I'm not asking for all your time, Sybil. All I'm asking for is a normal human relationship. I want you to see me not just as a wallet, but as a father, a grandfather." "Dad," her voice softened, "let's just forget all this. Let's start with a clean slate. Perry and I will come down on Sunday, have lunch together. We'll take the kids. They miss you." I almost laughed. Rupert and Tabitha hardly thought of me more than once a year, at Christmas when they received presents from me. "Sybil, I don't think that's a good idea. Not now. We need time to think it over." "But Perry's parents." "That's your problem with them, not mine," I said firmly. "I'm not putting on a show to improve your reputation in their eyes. You just—" She choked with indignation. "You're doing this out of spite." "No, Sybil. I'm doing this for me, for my own peace of mind. "Oh, good," she exclaimed. "Stay alone with your peace of mind, but don't call me when you realize that being alone is killing you." She hung up, and I was left sitting with the phone in my hand, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Something told me that Sybil would come back to this conversation. Her relationship with her husband's family was too important to her to give up so easily. And indeed, 2 days later, a message arrived from Peregrine, the first in all the years we'd known each other. "Humphrey, we need to talk man to man. Without Sybil, it's a serious matter. Can I drop by tomorrow?" I agreed, though not without hesitation. Something in the tone of the message made me wary. Peregrine arrived the next day, around 5 in the evening. He looked unusually serious and even a little nervous. Refusing tea, he got straight to the point. "Humphrey, the situation is worse than you think," he began. "My parents didn't just break off their relationship with us. They're spreading rumors. They're telling everyone that we're mistreating you, that we're using you for money." "But isn't that true?" I asked him calmly. He flinched as if struck by a blow. "Look, I know we weren't the perfect family, but we never wanted to hurt you. We just, lived our lives, and used me when it suited you," I finished for him. Peregrine lowered his eyes. "Maybe you're right. But that's not what this is about. These rumors are ruining our reputation. My colleagues look at me differently. One client even refused to work with me, said he couldn't trust a man who didn't respect his parents." "So what do you suggest?" "The same thing Sybil suggested. A public reconciliation. Let's show everyone we're on good terms. Maybe even invite my parents over for a family dinner so they can see that we care about you." I shook my head. "Peregrine, that wouldn't solve the problem. It would just create an illusion. Can't you see that it's not about what other people think? It's about what our relationship really is." "But we can change it," he exclaimed. "We'll call more often, visit more often. The kids will spend more time with you." "Until the scandal subsides," I said with a bitter chuckle. "And then everything would go back to normal." "No," he shook his head. "It'll be different this time. I promise." I looked at him closely. He had the desperation of a cornered man in his eyes. He wasn't thinking about our relationship. He was thinking about saving his reputation, his career, his social standing. "Peregrine," I said softly, "I can't do this. I can't pretend. Not for you, not for Sybil, not even for the grandchildren. I'm too old for games." "But what are we going to do?" There was an almost childlike desperation in his voice. "Start again. A real one. Not for others, but for ourselves. Change not on the outside, but on the inside." "You don't understand," he was almost shouting. "My parents are threatening to disinherit me. My career is in jeopardy. Everything I've built over the years is falling apart because of one bad dinner." "No, Peregrine," I shook my head. "Not because of dinner. It was years of neglect and disrespect. Dinner was just the last straw, and not for me alone, as you see." He stood up, his face contorted with anger. "You stubborn old man, you take pleasure in seeing us suffer. You're taking revenge on us for all these years. No, Peregrine, I'm just not part of your games anymore. And that's my right." He left, slamming the door so hard the glass shook. I was alone, but I felt strangely stronger than ever. I stood my ground, didn't give in to manipulation. It was a new, unfamiliar feeling. Over the next few days, I waited for more pressure from Sybil and Peregrine, but there was none. Apparently, they realized that I would not change my mind. Instead, I received an unexpected call from Alice Brighton, my neighbor. "Mr. Atwood, I'm going to our book club meeting tonight. Would you care to join me? We're discussing Dickens, and I think you mentioned that you love his work." I was surprised. We did talk about literature once, but I didn't expect her to remember my preferences. "Thank you for inviting me, Alice, but I'm not sure. It's been a long time since I've been out socializing." "That's all right," she said softly. "We're all old people. No one will judge you. It's just an opportunity to spend an evening in pleasant company and talk about good books. I hesitated. On the one hand, the thought of unfamiliar company was unsettling. On the other hand, the loneliness was beginning to weigh on me. All right, I finally decided. What time and where? 7 p.m. at the community center on Oak Street. I can pick you up and we can go together. I'd appreciate it. The evening at the book club was unexpectedly pleasant. 10 or 12 older people, genuinely passionate about literature, were discussing Dickens' Great Expectations. No pretense, no ulterior motives, just an honest exchange of opinions about a book that everyone loved. I made a few points about symbolism in the novel, and to my surprise, I was listened to attentively and even agreed with some of the observations. No one looked at their watches, no one interrupted, no one rolled their eyes as Sybil did when I started talking about something that interested me. After the discussion, there was a tea party where everyone chatted casually. I was introduced as a new member and several people came up to meet me in person. It was particularly enjoyable talking to Malcolm Pierce, a former university lecturer who shared my love of classic literature. "Next time we're discussing Thomas Hardy," he said as the evening drew to a close. "I hope you'll join us, Humphrey." "I will," I replied, and it was not an empty courtesy. On the way home, Alice told me about other activities at the community center: chess club, yoga classes for seniors, tours of historic sites. "Life doesn't end with retirement, Humphrey," she said. "Sometimes it's just the beginning." Those words struck a chord with me. Really, why did I think my life ended with Eleanor's death? Why had I allowed myself to sink into loneliness and dependence on an ungrateful daughter? The next week, I went to a chess tournament, then a lecture on modern art, then a field trip to the local history museum. With each event, my circle of acquaintances expanded. I met people my own age with similar interests, people who valued communication and mutual respect. I became especially close to Malcolm Pierce and his wife Dorothy. They were a little younger than me, but also retired. Malcolm taught English literature. Dorothy was a school teacher. They invited me over for Sunday lunch, and for the first time in a long time I spent the day in pleasant company, without tension or ulterior motives. "You know, Humphrey," said Malcolm as we sat in his garden after lunch, "Dorothy and I have a difficult relationship with our children too. Our son lives in Canada, busy with his career. Our daughter is closer, in London, but we see each other rarely. Sometimes I think it's part of modern life. Children go away and don't look back." "But you don't seem unhappy," I remarked. "Because we've found other sources of joy," Dorothy smiled. "Friends, hobbies, community, family is great, but it shouldn't be the only meaning of life, especially at our age." I pondered her words. Perhaps my mistake had been this: I'd become too fixated on Sybil and her family, made them the center of my universe. And when they showed their true attitude, my world had crumbled. But now I was building a new world, a more diverse and stable one. A world where there was room for different people and different attitudes. A world where I wasn't alone. A month after the restaurant incident, I received an email. Not an electronic one, but a real, paper one, delivered by post. From Sybil. I stared at the envelope for a long time before I dared to open it. "Dear Dad," she wrote, "I thought for a long time before writing to you. Pride prevented me from admitting that you were right. But time and circumstances have forced me to rethink many things. The relationship with Perry's parents is completely damaged. Not only have they cut off contact with us, but they've turned the whole family against us. Perry lost several important clients. I didn't get a promotion at work, but in a strange way, these hardships brought us closer together. Perry and I started talking more, supporting each other more. And we both came to the conclusion that you were right. We'd been focusing too much on the outside, on appearances, on other people's opinions, and too little on the real relationship. I'm not asking you to forgive us right away. I realize we hurt you with our neglect, But I want you to know that we've realized our mistakes and we really want to change, not for our reputations, but for ourselves, for the sake of being better. If you're ready, we'd like to start over, slowly, gradually, without pretense or falsity. A real relationship based on mutual respect. Love, Sybil. I reread the letter several times, trying to figure out if it was sincere. Was it another attempt at manipulation or a genuine admission of mistakes? Perhaps a little of both. But at least the tone was different, more mature, more realized. I took my time answering. I needed to consider my feelings. Did I want to reestablish my relationship with Sybil and her family? And if so, on what terms? A week later, I met Malcolm at the chess club and, after a game, told him about the letter. "What do you think?" I asked. "Should we give them a second chance?" He looked thoughtfully at the chessboard where we had just finished the game. "You know, Humphrey, in chess, as in life, sometimes you have to sacrifice a piece for a better position. But sometimes you can save a seemingly hopeless situation with patience and wisdom. The question is, what you want." "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "Part of me wants to forgive them, to give them another chance. Sybil is my only daughter after all. But the other part of me is afraid of being used again, of being their wallet and convenient grandfather when they need it." "I understand," Malcolm nodded. "But you know what I've noticed in the weeks we've known each other? You've changed, Humphrey. More confident, more independent. You have friends, interests outside of your family. Even if you decide to reconnect with your daughter, you won't be as vulnerable as you were before." There was truth in what he said. I had changed. I had a new life, new connections, a new raison d'être. I was no longer a lonely old man clinging to an unloving daughter as the last straw. And that's what gave me freedom. The freedom to forgive if I wanted to. The freedom to repair the relationship, but on my own terms. Freedom to say no if that relationship became toxic again. A few days later, I wrote a response to Sybil. Brief, but sincere. I said I was ready for a gradual rebuilding of the relationship, but on the basis of mutual respect. That I now had my own life, my own interests, and I would not sacrifice them for false marital well-being. That I loved her no matter what, but that I would no longer allow myself to be used. As I sent the letter, I felt a strange calmness. Whatever Sybil decided, I was prepared for any development. My life no longer depended on her choice. On my way home from another meeting of the chess club, I stopped at the park where Eleanor and I had often walked in the last years of her life. Sat down on a bench, our favorite, overlooking a small pond. "You know, Eleanor," I said quietly, addressing the void as I had often done in the last 3 years, "I think I've finally realized what you've been trying to explain to me all these years. That life doesn't end with loss, that you have to find new paths, new connections. That dignity is more important than comfort, and that sincerity is more important than illusions." A light breeze swept across the water, creating ripples on its surface. Nature itself seemed to respond to my words. "I'm no longer alone," I continued. "I have friends, I have interests, and maybe I'll have a family again. Not a perfect one, of course, but a real one. One where people respect each other." At that moment, I realized that the circle had closed. The restaurant incident, which seemed like a disaster, was actually a turning point in my life. Getting rid of a toxic relationship, even with my own daughter, gave me the freedom and dignity I had been denied for years. I stood up from the bench and slowly walked toward the park exit. There was another evening ahead at the book club, where we were to discuss Thomas Hardy. And tomorrow, an excursion with Malcolm and Dorothy to a neighboring town. And the day after that. Who knows? Life was full of possibilities, and I was no longer afraid of them. At 78, I had finally found what many people find much earlier, themselves.